Hey, what's up guys? Coach Chris here, Chris Liam Fitness, and today I want to talk about kettlebell, and if you would, kettlebell basics, right? I want to talk about the rack position specifically and how we can improve this position when you're working out so that you're getting more out of your exercise, right? So the kettlebell rack position is usually going to be used when you're doing any kind of pressing exercises, right? Any kind of squatting from this position or a double position. So the kettlebells are really good because they add an additional load of stability to the body when you're training, right? So this is why I like using them. Typically when we're training people, I like using, cables, kettlebells, barbells in a lot of the functional movements that we do. So a lot of people really struggle with this kettlebell rack position, right? Because they maybe sometimes lack the shoulder stability here, maybe some of the scapula and lat issues going on in the back. They don't have a good position. And what you'll typically see is, you'll see this happening. So a lot of people will kind of, if they do get the elbows in this position, they'll have it kind of leaning like this where the wrist is kind of broken, right? Or you'll see this happen a lot where the elbow gets really far out and they kind of just rest it kind of sitting on this shelf here, right? So those are some of the wrong things that you're going to see. So what's the right way to do this, right? What is the way that you should hold this, right? So what I always say is that there's three things that you really want to be focused on when you're holding your kettlebell, right? Right, so the first thing is going to be, your elbow placement. So I don't like to have the elbow directly vertical, right? So as you can see, straight up and down. We don't want to see this too vertical, right? And like I said, we don't want to see it winging out. What we want to do is we want to have it in a good straight position where it's slightly kind of 30 degrees, 40 degrees coming off, 45 degrees coming off of that side, right? So that's number one. You want to kind of have that elbow on a 30 to 45 degree angle. You should have some space here in between the armpit, right? So my shoulder's kind of working here and I kind of just got it sitting here on my forearm, right? So the next part, number two, right? Number two on this, what you're going to be really focused on is going to be your wrist placement, right? So earlier I was saying, you don't want to see the wrist kind of bending, right? So sometimes you'll see people kind of doing like a lot of weird stuff going on, right, with the wrist. And really what you want to see is that the wrist is nice and straight, right? So I always tell people, think about this as like my wrist is straight and I got like this lobster grip. We call it the lobster kind of claw. So we just kind of sit that bell right there inside of that hand. And then, we have a nice straight straight wrist. And then once I get my elbow out in the position, nothing changes, right? So my wrist still stays there, my elbow comes out. And then number three, the last thing that we want to focus on is where is our knuckles, right? So I like to say elbows, wrists, knuckles, right? So elbow placement, 30, 45 degrees. My wrist is nice and straight. And then my knuckles, I want them flat. And I always tell people when we're holding that bell, it's like you could just reach down and you could just go ahead and give your knuckles a kiss, or you can kind of see right here on that shelf right above where that's at, right? So those are the basics when it comes to where you want to hold your kettlebell when you're in that rack position, right? To make sure that you're engaging your shoulder the proper way, to make sure that you are taking all the benefits out of this exercise as far as loading your core, right? And that you're not getting yourself into an injury in the future. I think that's one of the biggest things is that when you start to get into those compensations, those are the things that typically lead to those injuries that you see in training, or those nagging injuries in the shoulder or maybe in the neck. So the kettlebell can be a great tool, but if you're not really holding it the right way, it can be one of those things that kind of leads to more issues downstream. So make sure you remember the three things. That's your elbow placement, your wrist, and your knuckles. Hope you guys enjoyed. Give me a thumbs up